Your client just pled guilty to all counts. Can you explain what the decision was?
It was just a matter of him deciding that he wanted to take responsibility for the crimes that he committed. He admitted guilt this morning. I think it was just a matter of, we were on the finish line. This was the day before the trial, and I think he came to the realization of what that was going to look like, and he made the decision to enter a guilty plea.
Now, he said to me on camera in August that he had never had sex with anybody against their will. That's exactly what he's charged with here. And now he's admitting that?
Well, David, there's a huge difference between what you say on camera and what you say in a courtroom under oath. Today what he said is that he's pleading guilty. He's taking responsibility for his actions, and everyone will have an opportunity to move forward in any way they can.
Did he specifically admit that he choked this person and caused him to go unconscious and then had sex with him?
He pled guilty to all the crimes that he was charged with.
Bobby, did he have a message to his victims?
There's no message. I think taking responsibility, is a message. I'm not trying to make him out to be some saint. Obviously the crimes that he committed were serious and horrible acts. But if you're asking me if there's a message, I believe anytime someone takes responsibility for their actions, that is a message in itself.
And what is essentially, I know you touched on what he said on camera when we talked to him last year. He said there was good and bad in everybody. He appeared to hear us just fine. Why did it take this long delay? What was the reasoning for this lengthy delay?
He's 93 years old, Aubrey. He's an old man. He's deteriorating. I don't know if you've spent a lot of time around elderly people, but when you get to that age, you can deteriorate very quickly. And I believe that, over this time frame, he deteriorated like any old person, any person that age would.
Were you surprised that he admitted this after defending him for the last year?
After 17 years of being a criminal defense lawyer, I'm never surprised of anything.
Were y'all taking this case, were y'all able to tell us, was this a pro bono case? Were y'all taking this, was he paying for y'all services? I know it's extensive to hire attorneys.
We're all private lawyers. None of us work for free. I'm not going to get into the details of our relationship.
Men of Melchizedek had nothing to do with this?
I have no idea who that is.
Catching up, next steps for you all? Next steps?
Next steps? The next steps is that he gets a life sentence. That's really all that's to it. There's of course going to be victim impact statements, which will, he's going to have to face those victims. And so that'll happen on December the 18th.
Any appeal process?
Not from us.
So y'all don't plan on appealing?
No, we do not plan on appealing. He has the rights that he has, and if he determines that that's something he wants to do, that's something he'll do.
So his age and his health is the reason why he pled guilty today?
The reason why he pled guilty was because he admitted that he's guilty.
But this was a long process, so why go through the long process and wait until today if he's getting older anyway?
Well, it's not unusual at all for a defendant to not plead guilty and then to get to this point where, they're on the finish line and the case is going to trial. They realize what is about to happen, and the reality of it, it really slaps you in the face. And I think, ultimately that's what happened today, and he took responsibility.
Does he remain at the long-term care facility until the sentencing?
That's all up to the sheriff's office. I'm not certain exactly where he'll be. They'll of course inform us as to where he's going, but I don't know where he's going to be at this point.
Do we know the total amount of victims?
All I can tell you is, he pled guilty to the indictment.
Did he say anything to you today that you could report to us?
I can't discuss anything that we talked about in private.
Anything else? If you had to sum this up, this has been quite the journey for a lot of people.
Yeah, this has been a long, difficult process, for everybody involved, especially obviously the victims. And I think that, by standing up in front of the court and taking responsibility for his actions today, it's one small thing that he could do to, eliminate any more pain.
Do you think if the diocese would have stepped in earlier rather than moved him from, assignment to assignment, this could have been taken care of a long time ago?
As a lifelong Catholic, I wish the Catholic Church would do a lot of things differently. But, that's one man in charge of that.
Thank you very much, Bobby.
Thanks, y'all.
Yeah.
All right, that is Bobby Hortzberg there, Lawrence Hecker's defense attorney, speaking to reporters minutes ago outside of the Orleans Parish Courthouse about the decision this morning to plead guilty on all of the charges he faced this morning. Attorney Hortzberg saying that there is no plan to appeal this case, no plan to go on for anything moving forward, that he does plead guilty, and that's where they're standing here. In asking why that was the case, considering that there were so many delays here, as you can recall, from Hecker's mental competency to the judge overseeing the case recusing himself. There are a lot of questions here. Let's get live back to the courthouse. District Attorney Jason Williams is answering reporters' questions. Let's listen in.
A number of times he pled guilty to every single count. He understands that when we come back on the 18th, the judge is going to sentence him to life sentence. And I believe this investigation and this prosecution represents a critical moment for some little boys who are now men, some of them who are now grandfathers, who have lived with this horrific abuse for years. Decades ago, these little boys told adults what happened to them, and they weren't believed. And there was a lot of, and you heard Richard talk about it, there was a lot of legal machinations and gymnastics just to get to a trial date. And I knew when we got this firm trial date, there would not be a place for this predator to run. And he pled guilty as charged. The crimes against women and children in this country have to be taken seriously, and they have to be prioritized. And if adults don't do their part, then predators are left to reoffend and hurt other people.
Talked about, I can recall D.A. Williams last June, we tracked him down. He told us there's good and bad in everybody. You held a news conference saying that the press kept the fire burning. Talk about that aspect of this entire roller coaster when it comes to Lawrence Hecker, and it seems like this was kept secret for quite some time.
Yeah, a lot of people did a lot of things, it seems, to protect the bad guys. I mean, there's a lot of good and bad. I haven't seen the good in Hecker yet. Even pleading guilty today, he knew what he did. He could have pled guilty a very long time ago. He could have pled guilty when we brought this case, if this was about remorse, if this was about repentance. These survivors, that's why we were in the courtroom as long as we were. We wanted to call each and every one of them and let them know what happened before we came out here. But they are the ones who had the courage. They had a lawyer like Richard who wasn't going to give up on this thing. And you're right. I mean, this shows why the press is important. The press pushed this. The press pressed something that it seemed like the system and institutions wanted to look away from and forget about. And that also feels criminal.
Can you talk about the headwinds you faced to bring this case forward, going back to when you were fighting to try to get the documents and everything?
It was, I had to go over to their hearings and listen in, and I had a moment where I talked to the judge at sidebar about what would be necessary for us to get our hands on the evidence of these rapes. And it should not be this difficult to investigate and prosecute an admitted rapist, and it was. I thank God for this, that this ends the criminal legal battle for these survivors, because a lot of them weren't believed. And to live your life and have been victimized and to survive through this has shattered families. There's families that aren't talking to each other because people are stuck in the middle of their faith and this brutal crime. One of these individuals, Lawrence Hecker, married him and his fiance because his bride's family was that close to Lawrence Hecker. Understand the complexities of this thing, and part of me really wanted this jury and the public to hear what Lawrence Hecker did to these boys, and to hear where he went and where he was moved and how he was moved, because that is equally as important as his acts, his violent acts, and his decisions.
You talk about the cover-up.
Without hearing that, how do you intend to have any future victims of similar crimes have confidence that their abusers will see justice in court?
You know, I mean, I think that's a challenge of the American criminal legal system today. Crimes against women and children are underreported because how they are treated early in the investigation, at the end of the investigation, how they're treated when they come to court, and what the institutions do that seems to oftentimes protect the predator. I hope that there's a message that although justice is sometimes delayed, it will not be denied.
You talked about the cover-up and people being held accountable for that. What does this do to that larger investigation of the church?
You know, I talked to Scott Rodrigue earlier today, who did a really wonderful investigation here. He had to go through a lot. There's a lot of documents for just a couple of folks to go through. And we dealt with the same thing. There's still ongoing investigations. There's an investigation right now that spans Texas and Louisiana. And we will await and we'll be watching that very closely as well. And we're going to pull on any thread that we find, and we're going to follow the evidence.
When did you find out that Lawrence Hecker was going to be pleading guilty, and did it come as a relief? I mean, how do you feel?
I'm not sure how I feel yet. I didn't see a defense for Lawrence Hecker. I was a defense attorney for a very long time. I know what the evidence was in this case, and it was difficult to everybody has a right to their day in court. Certainly, we were trying to get it to him months ago, and it seemed like we were running into every obstacle and hurdle to get there. I didn't see remorse. I don't think he was contrite. If he knew what he did, and he could have stepped up and pled guilty a very long time ago, and he should have, for these survivors and these now grown men who he hurt.
Did you find out before today?
No, ma'am. These trial bags that you see this team having, Andre Goda and Ned McGowan, we were prepared to go forward. We're prepped for jury selection. Scott Rodrigue was there because we thought we might get through jury selection early. He might be called as early as 2 o'clock. Prepared to go forward with opening statements after lunch. And I was, it's the first we heard of it, and a little bit surprised.
In this case, there was a confession by Lawrence Hecker that was kept secret within the bankruptcy files. Y'all were able to obtain it. Is it okay to keep records like that confidential and secret that show a pedophile admitting to crimes? Is that okay in your eyes to keep those things secret and sealed? Absolutely
not in my eyes or in the eyes of the law. There's a term called mandatory reporter, and if an adult finds out or is told by a child that they were hurt, they have to report that information. Whenever they find out, as soon as they find out, and it's horrific. It's horrific that they did.
Were you planning to call Paul Calamari to the stand to testify about what he was told when this happened?
Trials run their course, and we've got to figure out what's right at the right moment. We're going to call everything necessary to meet our burden of proof in there, and it would have depended on how evidence was proceeded. But we had an expert that I was really looking forward to the jury hearing and the public hearing, and really these men to hear that, when there's abuse of a child doesn't know anything about sexuality, right? And there's a lot of conflicts, and there's a lot of things that go on in a survivor's head where they blame themselves because they didn't fight back, or they didn't tell a parent sooner, or they walked into that room, and if they hadn't walked into that room. And so I really wanted that information to get out so the public can truly understand how complicated these things are, and that survivors have absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. It was not their fault, and the parents need to know that, and siblings need to know that. There's siblings that aren't on good terms because these men found the courage to tell the truth and to fight for justice.
Do you anticipate, are there any other former priests that you're looking into currently and like, similar to Hecker?
You know, the thing that is, and we've talked about this, you know, so many of these rapists and predators have died before they were held to account. And, you know, trouble with this case is a number of these cases that actually prescribed. And so we had to find, and Ned McGowan worked very hard to find the crimes that were still alive and viable so that we could bring this case. And I'm very grateful to my team at the DA's office for working creatively and diligently to make sure that we can hold this man to account.
And how does this impact the Archdiocese going forward?
You got to talk to them about that, but we're just going to prosecute the crimes that we see and the crimes that are referred to us wherever they are.
Were you planning on calling Amond or anyone to the stand?
Is he available to the investigators? Like, is there any opportunity for the investigators who are running the investigation into the Archdiocese to speak to Lawrence Hecker about what he knows and what actions his superiors took to protect him?
Those are the decision points for the investigators to make. Obviously, I think that's a good source of information because he knows who he told and what and when. But you need to talk to them about that.
Would his mental health impact him at all if they do reach out to him for any information in an investigation like that?
Look, I think he's an old man, right? I mean, I don't think there's. I'm not as sharp as I was when I was your age, right? And we all diminish a little bit over time. That does not impact or affect being held to account and being able to recall who you told what to and when you told him.
And him pleading guilty actually could help the investigation as well. He can't use dementia as an excuse to help in other investigations similar to this.
Well, I mean, look, at the end of the day, I think there are people out there who maybe were uncertain about if anything actually happened or what happened. This man pled guilty to every single count he was charged with because he knew what he did. So anybody who had any doubt about whether or not these boys told the truth or these men told the truth, that doubt has now been removed by the predator himself. All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
District Attorney, Orleans Parish District Attorney Jason Williams briefing reporters from the steps of the Orleans Parish Courthouse. This after admitted child pedophile Lawrence Hecker, former priest, pled guilty on all of the charges he faced, some rape and kidnapping charges. District Attorney Williams saying that today this decision was, quote, a critical moment for boys who are now men. Going on to say that with this guilty plea, despite the delays that were going on here and what seemed to have been a day where trial was set to begin, D.A. Williams saying that he didn't see a defense for Lawrence Hecker going forward here. And a lot of that stems from the fact that there is evidence, as you've seen here on WWL Louisiana, also other sworn testimony and statements from the Archdiocese that they were aware of the actions Hecker had done over the years, sexually assaulting young boys. Now, we heard D.A. Williams talk about the victims in this case, including one for whom Hecker served as the officiant for his wedding. We did speak to Richard Transit, the attorney for one of the victims, out the courtroom minutes ago. I want to listen into that.
Probably half of the victims who are going to testify against Lawrence Hecker are our clients. We know them, we know their stories, we know how not only credible but incredibly compelling and sad, gut-wrenching these stories are. And there really wasn't any solid defense that they could put forth.
How important is the statement that Paul Calamari made to the investigating officers, and would he have testified? Do you know that?
I don't know. I'm not privy to that level of detail. I think Calamari has some explaining to do. I think Greg Amon has some explaining to do. I think Alfred Hughes has some explaining to do. They covered this up. Let's not sugarcoat it. You know, these men who wear pointy hats and carry staffs and wear robes and wear fancy jewelry and gold chalices, they covered up child rape, pure and simple, which is the reason Larry Hecker was allowed to get away with what he got away with. And remember, in his confession, the first inkling that the Archdiocese had of Hecker molesting children was in the late 60s, early 70s. And it came up repeatedly, every decade. It came up in every decade, and they did nothing about it. They moved him like a toxic, dangerous chess piece from one parish to another with an endless supply of little boys. At one point, for God's sake, they put him in charge of the Boy Scouts. They put a pedophile in charge of the Boy Scouts for the Archdiocese. I think I said in an interview, and I believe it was with you, Aubrey, at my office, that it's time to pay the piper. And Larry Hecker is going to pay the piper, and I hope he suffers miserably. I have no forgiveness in my heart. I've seen too much of what this man has done. I saw Hecker's confession for the first time 5 years ago. And for 5 years, we have been getting blockaded, whether it's in the federal system or the state system. He got essentially 4 additional years of freedom because nobody would take what we were saying seriously. I mean, we had a confession about molesting children, and it was this difficult to get somebody to act on it. What does that say about society? What does it say about our court system? And, you know, not for nothing, Hecker was arrested in September of 2023 as a 91-year-old man, I think. Is that right, David?
Yeah.
And so you would think that this whole process would have been a lot more expeditious. I think Jason Williams and his people were wonderful. They got the result, they got the best result for the state and the people of Louisiana that they could have gotten. I am not going to throw barbs at any individuals who delayed this. They know who they are. Everybody who played a part in delaying justice for Lawrence Hecker knows exactly who they are. And so it's bittersweet for me. I'm a civil lawyer. I don't do criminal law. But, you know, I have had as a mission for 5 years to see this day come, to see the day where Lawrence Hecker either pleads guilty or is found guilty. And like the coward that he is, he lied about it. I didn't do it. And then, you know, when the jury's getting ready to be put in the box, says, well, you know what? Now I'm going to admit to what I really did.
Richard, there's a difference between his confession in '99, what he's confessed to on camera, and now what he's confessing to here. Do you want to hear him say what exactly he did to your client?
I do, and in fact, my client is extremely disappointed that he wasn't able to be in the courtroom to hear Hecker admit what he did to him. Because while he's admitted other crimes, he never admitted this one. And the length of detail that my client was going to explain to a jury and what Hecker did to him, the violence of it, you know, the overt sexual, I mean, it was a choke out rape. And that's about as bluntly as I can put it. And I mean, look, this happened in the early to mid 70s, and, you know, he lived on credit. And not only lived on credit, I mean, they knew Hecker was a child molester. They, meaning the Archdiocese of New Orleans, everybody. They knew Hecker was a child rapist, and they promoted him to Monsignor. Gave him a new title, continued to pay. They continued to pay him until 2020 when the bankruptcy judge said you can't pay guys like Hecker anymore.
What does this conviction do for the larger criminal investigation of the Archdiocese?
let me get my crystal ball out. No, I think for certain it establishes the fact that there are bad pedophile priests who are still lurking out there. I know who they are. I could give someone a list of who they are. I think there are 22 of them who have served in the Archdiocese of New Orleans, who have been credibly found to have molested children, who have never been investigated, prosecuted, convicted, because they've lived under the umbrella of protection of child rapist protectors like Gregory Amen.
Richard Trahant there, an attorney representing one of Lawrence Hecker's victims, speaking to reporters outside the Orleans Parish Courthouse minutes ago after Lawrence Hecker pled guilty this morning to all of the charges he faced, some rape and kidnapping charges tied to an alleged incident he had back in the 1970s. Attorney Trahant saying that the Archdiocese of New Orleans is also complicit here, saying, quote, they moved him, talking about Hecker, around like a toxic piece of a toxic, dangerous chess piece, his quote there. A lot of questions about what happens next, specifically with the Archdiocese of New Orleans, too, settlements and whatnot for other allegations, potentially other cases here. But let's focus on this in the news of the day. Our David Hammer, Chief Investigator David Hammer, he's standing by live now at the courthouse. David, a lot of what we found out today, your reporting revealed last year, particularly in that interview with Hecker where he admitted to his wrongdoings. I want you to walk me through what you experienced in the courtroom this morning.
Well, good morning, Brandon. First of all, we never went in the courtroom because before they could even bring the jurors in for selection, the judge came out and announced that there was a guilty verdict because Lawrence Hecker had pled guilty to all counts. Now, nobody saw that coming, even though he confessed on camera, as you said, to us in August 2023. He only confessed to molestation that he had admitted in 1999, and when we specifically asked him if he had ever choked out and raped anybody or raped anybody against their will, he said no definitively, and he pled not guilty initially to the charges here in this case, which are that he aggravated kidnapping, aggravated rape of a underage boy in 1975. Now, I'm joined now by our reporting partner, Ramon Antonio Vargas of The Guardian. He and I went to interview Lawrence Hecker on camera in August 2023. And Ramon, nobody saw this coming today, him standing up and taking accountability and pleading guilty to raping a boy, an underage boy, against his will in 1975.
That's correct. I specifically asked, in preparation for this trial, all sides of the case, is there any hope for a plea deal? The state wasn't offering anything, which basically meant if he pleads guilty, it'll be his decision. I spoke with Lawrence Hecker's attorney, Bobby Ortsberg, after the guilty plea was entered. He said he took responsibility for the charges this morning, and that it was his decision. I specifically asked, did anybody above him, including the people to whom he confessed these crimes, some of these crimes back in 1999, did they pressure him to do anything? He said it was his decision.
Well, it's interesting, too, because we see that there's a little bit of disappointment for the victims expressed through his attorney, Richard Trahant, saying that he had hoped to go and confront Lawrence Hecker at trial, and he didn't get that chance. But on the opposite side of it, you have Lawrence Hecker admitting under oath that he did this.
The only thing that I would add to the sentiment of losing the chance to address Lawrence Hecker is we know that he is scheduled for sentencing on December 18th. Tentatively, we know that he's going to get a life sentence, but what the value of that hearing will be the opportunity that his various victims will get to address him, to tell him what he did to them, especially now that he has admitted to everyone that he is in fact a child rapist.
And at the victim impact statements, we would expect that he would be there and his victims would be there to confront him, and he would have to hear from them. Is that correct?
Absolutely. That is the point of that hearing will be for the judge to hear. I mean, there is really no discretion on this sentence, right? He has pleaded guilty to a crime that carries an automatic life sentence. That said, part of that hearing will focus the bulk of that hearing will center on his victims addressing him and letting him know exactly what the effects of his abuse were on their life.
Now, Ramon and I have been doing these stories over the last 5 years about allegations against various priests. We have in the bankruptcy more than 500 victims alleging that they were molested or sexually abused by over 300 priests who were here in the New Orleans area over the many decades. What do you think this does for that larger investigation that actually came out of the Hecker investigation, which is now an investigation of a massive cover-up in the Archdiocese of New Orleans?
So there will have to be a decision made about to what extent. I mean, investigators running that probe will know exactly where Lawrence Hecker is. And at this point, there is no question of not self-incrimination and whatnot. It will be interesting to see if the decision is made to try to speak to him and get some details from him about who knew what, when they knew it, and whether any of his superiors, including ones that are still leading the Archdiocese, did anything that would obstruct justice, and whether and if that act is still within time limits for a prosecution. It remains to be seen, but if not, the legacy for this case is remarkable in the sense that we've seen over and over again abusers get a trial date here, never face that trial date because either the trial is called off or they die under indictment, and it gave birth, like you said, to that larger investigation. So this is truly a remarkable outcome for the Catholic clergy abuse crisis in New Orleans and its relationship to this building in particular.
Yeah, historically speaking, this is a massive day because it establishes, it almost stands in for a whole bunch of other cases that we've seen where it never got to trial. The charges against George Brignac, for instance, where he actually died while awaiting trial and accused by more than 24 victims. We have now a case where we have a priest who has pled guilty to actual rape charges.
In other cases, priests made it to trial and they were acquitted on technicalities, or they were acquitted because a judge just nullified the law and the verdict. And so it is truly a historic day, and in terms of the city with such a huge Catholic population, for a clergyman accused of the worst crime to be one of the worst crimes that there is to be brought to justice in this manner. I mean, he will die in prison a child rapist, a convicted child rapist.
So that's the story from here for now, Brandon. This is a major decision, major move by Lawrence Hecker to come forward and say, I did this. I choked out and raped a underage teen in a church in 1975. That's essentially what he admitted to, although we won't hear from him until December 18th. But at that time, the victims in this case, those are victims who say that Lawrence Hecker molested them, and the victim in this specific incident, who says that he reported in 1975 that he was raped, kidnapped, and sexually assaulted in a church. So for now, going back to you, Brandon, David Hammer reporting from Criminal Court in Orleans Parish.
Phenomenal reporting, David. Thank you to both you and Ramon. Before I let you go, I want to bring up something that you and Ramon were just talking about, and you asked the district attorney about this when we're looking at just how big contextually today's decision may play in the other investigation going on here. You asked about who knew what and when and what could have happened in terms of why they didn't let that information get out there and whether that could be problematic. D.A. Williams talking about that lawful mandatory reporting there. I just want you to recap that.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Brandon. I specifically asked D.A. Williams whether they were planning on calling Paul Calamari to the stand. Paul Calamari was the principal at the school, St. John Vianney Prep, where this person who's now an adult who made the allegations in this case went directly to him. He and his family went directly to the principal, Paul Calamari, at the time to report what had happened to him at the hands of Lawrence Hecker. And Paul Calamari apparently did nothing about it. We're not even sure if he reported it up the chain in the church. Certainly was not reported to the police, and that is an example of the mandatory reporting requirement. Paul Calamari is still alive, and he was approached and interviewed by Scott Roderick, the lead investigator for the state police, and according to his affidavit in the case against involving the church and the larger cover-up, he says that Paul Calamari admitted to him that he, Paul Calamari himself, had molested children. So that shows you the broader scope of this, the fact that people who were made aware of this were also accused of similar crimes and did nothing about it when they had the information. As Ramon mentioned, the church actually did finally report allegations against Lawrence Hecker to the New Orleans Police Department in 2002. Many, many years after all of this happened, and many years after he had admitted various crimes to the church. And but at that time, they only reported one case that happened out of state, and so you see this trend continuing. Even when they did report some things, they didn't report all of them, and they certainly didn't report this incident where he was accused of raping and choking out a child until he was unconscious and taking advantage of him.
All right, Chief Investigative Reporter David Hammer. David, we do thank you for your reporting this morning. I know you've got a lot to do there as we continue to learn more about what happens next. We will check in with you when we see you all again live at noon. But again, the news this morning, Lawrence Hecker, the retired priest, the admitted child rapist, pled guilty this morning to multiple charges connected to rape, also kidnapping, an alleged incident that took place in the 1970s where he raped a teenage boy. But the allegations against Hecker involve multiple victims, as our reporting has told us over the past year or so, including an admission from Hecker himself on air with our David Hammer. He will be sentenced on December 18th. At that point, we also do hope to hear from some of the victims in this case who also wanted to hear from Hecker himself about why he did what he did, pleading guilty today to that one count. But again, what happens next? Larger questions about the archdiocese, that bankruptcy settlement money there, and what this case may mean, how it may play into that larger picture there. Still quite a few questions. We do thank you for staying with us here on this special coverage as we break into reporting on WWL Plus, also WWLTV.com. We'll be right back here live at noon with what you need to know about Lawrence Hecker pleading guilty this morning. Thank you.